Welcome to Sunshine Week. This is a little bit of a teach-in we're doing, and I told my class to look that up. Teach-in is a boomer word. And we're doing this because this is Sunshine Week. It's the week that we celebrate openness in government and the laws that enable us to get access to government information and public records. So I think what we're going to do, we have folks from Professor Herzog's class, folks from my class, and this is open to anyone else from the community, both our journalism community and our larger community. We're streaming it on Facebook. And so if any of you ask questions, we really want you to interrupt us and have questions. You may hear us repeat those questions so that people can hear it on the streaming audience. And we will archive this so people can go back and see it, or you can point other people to it. I'm going to start by giving a little bit of history of how the Sunshine Laws came to be. I'm going to go through that fairly quickly, but the reason I'm doing that is that we really, I think, need to understand what the Sunshine Laws were created to do and to counteract. And there have been several big movements in our history in the U.S. to promote more sunshine in government. And each time that happened, it was in response to government corruption. So let's look at what we're trying to clean up here when we talk about sunshine. So first, I'm going to give you a few caveats. The good news is we have sunshine laws. That's great. Less good is that they can be difficult to use. And making sunshine requests, particularly when we get onto the federal level and we're talking about the Freedom of Information Act, can require a lot of persistence and patience, which I know is very hard for students who are trying to get things done in a hurry in a semester. But let's talk about a little bit of why sunshine. And let's see, I don't know if this is going to play for you, but I'm going to show you a little video I don't think it's showing here. Sorry about that. But you can get the idea. Let me go back. This is Niger, and the video is not playing, but I think you can see these are dirt roads. And the reason I show this is from a reporting trip or a training trip I took about a year or so ago to West Africa. Very poor country, a country where there's a lot of corruption and democratic institutions are fragile. Now there's a lot of money in this place because we saw a lot of big houses behind very high walls with all kinds of antennas and electronics for every kind of communication you can imagine. But yet, as you can see, the roads here are dirt, the roads that the public uses. And that's a tell. That tells you that where there is corruption and where there is not strong democracy, the wealth does not get spread around the people. So why is sunshine important? Sunshine is important because we all behave better if we know somebody's watching. And that certainly includes the government. So let me see here. Let me get back to my slideshow. All right. Sorry, technical difficulties. Okay, help me here. Hang on. Okay, I'm going to do this again. All right, present. All right, so let me go back to my slide. So Sunshine Week this week is an event that's been celebrated by mostly news people. It was started in 2005 by the American Society of Newspaper Editors. That is now known as the News Leadership Association, and the SPJ, the Society of Professional Journalists. Why did they pick this week in March to celebrate sunshine? Does anybody know? Any clues? Yes?
Birthday week.
What?
It's my birthday week.
Oh, it's Fred Anklam's birthday. Yes, the government editor for, that's probably it. Okay. And if any of you want to be giving him presents, he'll be glad to take it. It's also the birthday week of James Madison. James Madison was born, I think, 272 years ago on Thursday. And of course, he was, in addition to being the fourth president of the United States, he was the author of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and every good journalist knows what the very first one is. That is the amendment that protects freedom of the press. And so that's why the newspaper editors picked this week to be Sunshine Week. We've celebrated it every year since 2005. But you can see there's no sunshine or sunlight in the First Amendment, but you really can't have freedom of speech if you don't know what you're talking about. And so as the history of the United States moved on, it became very clear that in order for the public to have this freedom to make intelligent decisions, we needed to have access to information. And by the time we got to the late 19th century, early 20th century, a lot of political power had been consolidated in corporations, which were beginning to form back at that time, and also in the hands of small groups of powerful people and their cronies. And it's these groups that Louis Brandeis was crusading against. Before Louis Brandeis became the first Jewish justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, he was a public crusader against corruption in his hometown of Boston. And of course, we know there's very little political corruption there. But he still found some work to do. And Brandeis became very famous for pushing for more openness in government. And several years before he went on to the Supreme Court, he wrote a very famous essay in Harper's Weekly, and he said, "Publicity is justly commended as a remedy for social and industrial diseases." Remember, this is the industrial age. It's the age of a lot of abuse before unions, corporate power. And Brandeis went on to say, "Sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants." So, that is the origin. It was Brandeis's phrase that he turned that really later would launch a movement. But at this point, this was the progressive era. Woodrow Wilson came in, enacted a lot of laws to control trusts, followed by, and also Teddy Roosevelt, so it was bipartisan. And that was the beginning of this effort to make government more open and accessible to the people. Now, the next hero in this saga was born just 2 years after Brandeis wrote his famous essay, where he talked about sunlight as the best of disinfectants. John Moss became a member of Congress in 1953. He was a Democrat. He represented a district in Northern California in the Sacramento area. Now, he was elected in 1953, and he won a very, very narrow election in which he was accused of being a communist or a communist sympathizer. What was going on in the 1950s that made that such a potent allegation? Does anybody know? This was the era of McCarthyism. This was the era of the Red Scare, when everybody was looking for communists under the bedspread, and there were allegations that U.S. diplomats had lost China to the communists. And I think it's really hard, if you go back and look at the history, to understand how terrifying that was. People could be called before congressional committees and publicly interrogated in ways without attorneys, without any way to really rebut the charges that were being made against them. They could be slandered in writings. And if you were accused of being a communist, you essentially became unemployable. So this was a very, very scary time. And it was journalism later that would turn the tide against this, but that was still in the future when John Moss was accused of being a communist. And so when he narrowly won this election, this was something he never forgot. And 2 years after winning his job, he then became the head of a little subcommittee, a special subcommittee on government information. He used that platform to start to ask a lot of questions about charges that were being made and even people getting fired from the government with really no public forum to push back or no revelation of just what these secret records were. So Moss started working, but it took him a long time to get anything done. And what really pushed this, he kept pushing it all through the 50s, but what turned the tide and made a lot of his other colleagues sympathize was a war that was never declared, but that killed 58,000 people, 58,000 Americans, just Americans. That was just the American casualties. So what happened here was that this was a war that was declared, and all of it was just listen to us, we the government know what we're doing. A lot of the information was never disclosed about how these decisions were being made. And by the late 1960s, Congress was getting fed up. And Moss was suddenly able to get a coalition behind his Freedom of Information Act. And interestingly, one of his early allies was this young congressman from Illinois named Donald Rumsfeld, whom you probably know as a former Secretary of Defense. And interestingly, as Secretary of Defense, I wouldn't say that Donald Rumsfeld was the best friend of openness and the press, but early in his congressional career he was, and he was a Republican, he was one of Moss's he was an ally to Democrat John Moss in this effort to get the Freedom of Information Act passed. The bill was passed in 1966, and Lyndon Johnson signed it into law on July 4th of that year, which seems like a very auspicious day, right? You know, American independence, we have our freedom of information, but that's not why Johnson signed it then. Johnson really did not like this bill at all, but he signed it because he saw the polls, they were pretty bad, and he knew that if he didn't sign the bill, there would be hell to pay politically. So he signed it on July 4th on his ranch with absolutely no cameras. That's why we don't have any pictures. It was kind of a secret signing. Nonetheless, that law gives the public the right to request records from any federal agency and creates a presumption of openness for the records. But states are a very different thing. You know, this is a federal law, and states are very different. We have our own laws, and there had been a crusade underway to do something similar with state meetings and state records, led by the American Society of Newspaper Editors, now the News Leaders Association. Okay, they had been working on this since the 1950s, just like Moss had been with the Freedom of Information Act, with very limited success until another big event happened, the Watergate scandal. And suddenly, Americans were once again confronted with this spectacle of people with a lot of money, suitcases, literal suitcases full of it, as a matter of fact, being able to pay off government officials under the cloak of darkness without anybody knowing what was going on. And the reaction to that started to push states to pass sunshine laws. And we in Missouri were one of the very first states to pass a sunshine law. It was signed into law in August of 1973, 50 years ago this year. That's why we're celebrating 50 years of sunshine in Missouri. And it was pushed by Democrats. Of course, the Watergate scandal involved a Republican president, Richard Nixon, and it was pushed by Democrats. A guy named Bill Kaysen, who was a member of the state Senate, was the sponsor of SB 1, which became the Sunshine Law of Missouri. And his House counterpart was another Democrat named Howard Volkmer. But this law was very strongly supported by the Attorney General of Missouri then, John Danforth, who is now retired from the U.S. Senate. And it was signed into law by Kit Bond, another Republican who was governor at the time, but who, like Danforth, became a member of the Senate, of the U.S. Senate. So even though it was pushed by Democrats, it was very much supported and enacted by Republicans who were part of their party's Reform Caucus. So this was a bipartisan effort. And it was followed later, a couple years later, by a federal Sunshine Act, which the Freedom of Information Act was focused on public records. This focused on public meetings and said there is a presumption of openness. So the states in this case were the leaders. Now, the Sunshine Law in Missouri, when it first passed, was so short. It was about a page long, maybe a page and a half, but it was short enough that the Missouri Press Association, I guess by putting it in teeny type, managed to put it on a wallet-sized card that you could carry with you and read to public officials if they tried to keep you out of a meeting or keep records away. So people would stand up and read this, and usually the public officials would fold. Now, the law is, I don't try to even read that. This is just a portion of the additions that have been made to the law, which is now about 30 pages worth of exemptions from the Sunshine Law. So over the years, the amount of sunshine has been chipped away and chipped away. And in fact, this year, the legislature is in session right now. Ask Fred Anklem about that. He's the editor in charge of that. And there is a bill before the state Senate right now that would further chip away at the Sunshine Law. This one would take aim, the legislators are trying to exempt themselves and their own records from sunshine requirements. And one of the things they're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, Fred, we don't want constituents who were writing letters to us, their privacy being exposed. And so let's exempt constituent mail. Well, there's a problem with that, in my opinion, because under this U.S. Supreme Court, corporations are considered people, and corporations and corporate officers are constituents too. And wouldn't you like to know if a big corporation in your community is asking the state legislature for an exemption from the law against putting a sludge heap next to your local public school? So I think this is problematic. We're hoping that we can get the sponsor of the bill to come here and talk about it. But this is one of many types of exemptions that have been proposed and in many cases enacted since the passage of the law 50 years ago. There have also been complaints that the state attorney general's office, which is supposed to enforce the Sunshine Law, tends to favor the state agencies who would rather not comply with it or would slow walk it. So the Sunshine Law is not perfect. And the point of this is it does some important things, but it needs to be defended and it needs to be justified. every year, I think, every day, every time we go to use it. But I want to make the point, and I don't know how well you can see this chart. This is from the Missouri Attorney General's office, and this column over here, this big gray column, shows you, it's a breakdown of who files sunshine requests. And it's not journalists who are the majority of sunshine requests, it is the general public. So even though journalists are the ones who celebrate the Sunshine Law, and we use it an awful lot, first of all, we use it in the public's interest, and secondly, it is really a law for the public. So you, the people, can have access to the documents and the meetings that you, the people, are paying for through your tax dollars. So that is really, I just came to sort of give you a little background about why these laws were passed. This slideshow will be available to everybody in the classes, and so I've got some resources there for you and some hot links on the slide, so if you want to follow up on this. And now I'm going to introduce David Herzog, who is going to show you how to use the Sunshine Law.
All right, great. Thanks so
much,
Kathy.
All right. No applause necessary in the class. Okay.
Okay, before I start talking a little bit about the Sunshine Law, I'm interested in knowing, like, how many of you are Mizzou students who are here attending this, you know, for classes or just kind of like to get like better at doing stuff. Okay, anybody from the general public here at this? Okay, and how many like working reporters are here? Okay, great. So yeah, it's nice to see everybody here, and I think Kathy did like a really great job at showing why this is so important. If we as journalists lose access to this information, we can't do our jobs. And also for the public, if they can get answers from government too, they're kind of stuck with things as well. So. To me, the Sunshine Law is the kind of thing, as Kathy mentioned too, is we really need to like practice it and exercise our rights under the Sunshine Law. So I'm just going to go and talk, kind of like give a little background too. I will tell you sometimes filing an open records request is scary to me, just because it can be really, really complicated and involved, especially if you're using FOIA, the federal law. Sunshine Law is not as bad as for reasons that we'll see. But if you're looking for data and documents, the best thing to do is like go and try to find data and documents that are already online. And this is and these are some slides that we use for training at investigative reporters and editors, which is a global journalism nonprofit organization that's based here at the journalism school. So we have around like 5,000 members worldwide. So we have a pretty big reach, and one of the challenges that journalists around the world are always facing is accessing this information. So we're just gonna like jump into like if you want to like get government data and documents the easy way, there are some easy options. And that's basically with online. Oh, you can see the illustration. Good. And so this is a video of a news team when a public records request is fulfilled. So if you've ever filed an open records request and you've been successful at it, it's really an amazing feeling to get that information. But that doesn't happen very often, especially if you're working in our newsrooms, or for like in newsroom content creation classes and things like that. You're here for 15 weeks. 15 weeks might not be enough time for you to get everything you want. So that's one thing to consider for sure, that it could take a lot of time to go and like wait for this information. Oh, good. We have the illustrations working here too. It's like actual video of a reporter finding data online while everyone else waits for a response to the records requests. So that raccoon is a very happy raccoon because they found stuff online and didn't have to like wait and file an open records request. How many of you have filed an open records request either for your reporting or for your classes? And how did that go in general? Were you successful? Fair.
How many of you were successful? How many put up your hands? Okay. And how many of you feel like you are still spinning your wheels? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and that definitely can happen with under different laws. All right, so I'm just going to quickly go through some government websites where you can download data and documents, and feel free to open your laptops and visit these websites too. So, because if you're curious about that, actually like checking these sites out, go for it and take a look.
Yeah, and I'll just say, just to underscore the point that David was making, a lot of times it seems really sexy to file an open records request because I'm doing this cool thing where you could save time by just going onto the website and getting the information. One of the things we try to talk to government officials about is say, you can avoid all these annoying open records requests if you just put your information online where the public can get it. And a lot of government agencies do that.
And we're going to start with the federal government. And how many of you know that the federal government has an open data portal that's called data.gov? Okay, not too many, right? Most of you who've taken are in class right now or have taken class with me. And how many of you have actually like tried to use data.gov to get data from it? And so, like, how has that experience been?
It was pretty good. I had to get this for information on senators in Missouri, and I found that to be pretty easy, especially what I was looking for was like funding and like how much money they're raising for their campaigns. And I found a lot of that information through this website.
Okay, great. The answer that we have for those of you listening on Facebook is that he was able to find a lot, data about federal spending in Missouri?
Campaign funding, federal spending for their campaigns.
Okay, great. Yeah. So data.gov is a decent starting point. It's kind of hard and can be overwhelming to navigate. They do have this Google-like search where you can go and like punch in search terms, and then you can also I'll see if I can go here too.
Yeah, one thing while David's doing that, I will say data.gov is a fantastic site, but it can be overwhelming. Has anybody found that you've been sort of lost in cyberspace? When you've gone on there, yeah, Teddy, you said yes. Were you able to find anything at all?
Different times I've had varying degrees of success, but I've definitely felt that.
Okay. A lot of these data sites are like any piece of software you use, which is the more you use it and get accustomed to it, the easier it's going to be. But just know that when you go onto these websites, it will be daunting at first, and you have to be, just like you have to wait for a public records request to come back. Here you have to wait to allow that learning curve for you to happen. You're not going to be able to just go on and grab a story in 30 seconds. You know, this requires a bit of a learning curve, and it also, I would say, because data sets are quite complicated, always verify. Try to reach an official in the government agency you're talking to, just to make sure you're not misinterpreting, because it can be quite confusing if you're for a newbie, right?
Yeah, and so that kind of like leads into a tip that don't try this on deadline. Become familiar with the data sites, and even like download the data that you think you might use later. And the way I like to like navigate through data.gov is just click that data tab. Whoops, that's not showing up.
Yeah.
Let's see. Maybe.
There it is.
Oh, boom, there it is. Okay. And then, yes, so when we go and click on that data tab, that takes us to the main navigation page, and you can certainly like go onto there and scroll through the data sets, and oh, hey, look what the most popular data set is today.
At right now.
Bank failures, because they're kind of like Silicon Valley Bank, failing, being in the news and everything. So yeah, there's kind of like a lot of interest in failed banks across the United States. So this is like one way that we can like go and get more information, but yeah, it's definitely something that's difficult to navigate. And then more useful, and having data about government agencies closer to home is data.mo.gov. And data.mo.gov is, how many of you have like tried to use data from it? Allie, yeah.
Yeah, well, I used it I've used it a couple of times for like census stuff, and also just for stuff.
Okay.
I found it a lot easier to navigate than the US one, obviously, a little smaller.
So yeah, and so again, the kind of like the impression about data.mo.gov is just not as tough and overwhelming to navigate, and you can it's easier to find data sets here that are applicable to the stories that you're doing. But again, I personally would not want to like dive into any one of these on deadline. I would want to be familiar with it and know all what's in here.
But for those of you who are on beats or who are following a particular issue, this is the kind of thing you can do when you're not on deadline, and you can look around and you can find story ideas here.
All right, then another great data site from the state of Missouri is Missouri Accountability Portal. And Missouri Accountability Portal is a website that's run by the General Assembly, so the state legislature down in Jeff City. And they've been collecting data on this particular website that goes back to, I think it's 2000, which is probably like when some of you were born, right? So this is kind of like a lot of old archive data that's on this data site, and especially if you're covering the state government beat, it's a real gold mine, because we have data about state expenditures, and it's current to 2023. And then we also have things employee data, which lists information about like each state employee, who they work for, how much they get paid, that kind of thing. And then also things like tax credits, which are sometimes like hot legislative stories, like in certain years. So, and then also federal grants, which have become more important, since COVID, and there's a lot of federal aid to state governments. So, if you were doing a story about kind of like what was happening with federal spending coming to Missouri, you could find it in that particular data file. And these data sets, and I'm sorry to give like flashbacks to students who took my class or are in class. These are in kind of like a very particular data format that's called delimited text. So open data portals don't typically have files in things like Excel, but because that's not an open format, so they tend to post the data in these different kinds of text files that you can then go import into different data programs. So you have to be, have a little familiarity with like how to import that stuff to Excel or to other files. So I really love this website. This is kind of like ton of good information here.
Yeah, but I will say most, whether it's Google Sheets or Excel, most of these spreadsheet programs make it pretty easy now, right? It's kind of paint by numbers. You just do import and you're pulling your data set in, and it gives you pretty easy instructions for how to get it into a table that you can read more easily.
And one of my student groups last spring, the state employment turnover was a pretty big story because there was the idea that during COVID, state employees were underpaid. So some state legislators were concerned about the turnover and things like that, and there were some bills, and then they were able to download the employee data, like match up the different tables and look at like which employees had been on the payroll at one point in time and then had dropped off like over a 5-year period. So they were able to actually be the authoritative journalists on this story and kind of like figure that out using data from this site. Another website they should know about if you're covering Missouri state government is the Missouri Ethics Commission. And the Missouri Ethics Commission is the state government agency that tracks people who are running for office in Missouri, whether it's statewide offices, like governor or like state senators. And then they also track things like local school board candidates. So you can find data about those candidates on the Missouri Ethics Commission website, and it's a really fantastic place to go and to get records. How many of you have used the Missouri Ethics Commission? Okay, great. So yeah, this is it's fantastic and useful, very useful. And then you should also be on the lookout for like county and local government sites. And the City of Columbia has a constantly redesigned like transparency portal that has kind of been okay at different points in time and not so awesome at different points in time. But the City of Columbia has kind of like a very limited number of options of things you can get records on or like download different data files. Has anybody used this? Okay, so and what do you use it for?
I've used it for a couple of things.
Okay.
Okay, trash information. I'm repeating that for the Facebook crowd.
Was that information trash?
That's a hot topic in Columbia.
Okay, and what were there any records on there, or did you have to like file a request?
They gave me information, but it was not in a usable format.
Okay, and we'll talk about that kind of thing later too. And if you need to file an open records request with the city of Columbia, they will point you to this portal and say, go use this portal because this is how we like follow and track requests. And there are also like different data sets that are pretty cool and interesting too. There's a like city checkbook, so you can see an entry for every time the city spent money with the vendor on something. So and and they have like several years worth of data, so you can download, literally hundreds of thousands of rows of data about Columbia spending if you want to.
Yeah, and if you look at the first tile there, it's meetings, and any of you who've used this website probably know that you can get minutes of the meetings, or an account of what happened at a city council meeting or some other meeting. Same with the school board, the Columbia Public School website, and you can also get an agenda for those meetings. That is all because of the Sunshine Laws. Prior to the Sunshine Laws, believe it or not, you often couldn't get an agenda of a public meeting, nor could you get necessarily access to these meetings. So things we take for granted now really are as a result of laws that were passed in the 60s and the 70s.
All right, so this is City of Columbia's kind of okay transparency portal. It doesn't have like a whole lot of information like some of the other government data portals. I will give a shout out to City of Kansas City. Believe it or not, Kansas City has an amazing open data portal where you can find anything from crime reports to things like delinquent buildings and things like that. So Kansas City, Missouri has really invested a lot of time and effort in developing an open data portal, and it's like, if I were a journalist in Kansas City, I'd be all over that and try and check out what information is in there.
Which makes me think, this is another story that you could do. How much is your local government investing in openness? Because it does cost money to create and maintain these websites. How much does your government put into that as opposed to some other city?
And we also have Boone County. So again, we have the City of Columbia, which has a lot to do, with our lives, but also, Boone County government does too, because we have things like the Boone County Sheriff's Office. If you have a motor vehicle, or if you have a house, Boone County taxes those things. So you can go, hop on this website and look up people's properties, what they're paying, for what kind of motor vehicles they have, what kind of taxes they're paying on their motor vehicles. So it's really good for things like real property, like houses, and then also things like the motor vehicles. So it's another good site to familiar yourself with. And then also, I want to point out there are these things that are called records retention schedules. Nobody says, yay, records retention schedules. These are the best things, ever, in terms of having to chew through them and everything. But what records retention schedules do is they tell us what state government agencies are supposed to keep in terms of different records and data. And not only state governments, but also within Missouri, it also covers things like local governments, Columbia, Boone County Sheriff's Department, rural water districts that kind of provide water to people, that kind of thing. So it's there's kind of a lot of different levels of government that are accounted for. And what records retention schedules are good for is they'll list by name the record that government officials are supposed to keep. So, and you could go and look up that state government officials are supposed to keep records of sunshine requests for 2 years. So that's a good thing to know if you would go and file an open records request with the Missouri Department of Agriculture. You can then go, oh, okay, I'm going to get your sunshine requests for the past 2 years. And if they say, oh, we only keep 1 year's worth, it's like, yeah, the state records retention schedule says you're supposed to be keeping that for 2 years, not for 1. So, and this is super useful too, because when we're exercising our rights under open records laws, it's kind of like getting in the mindset of identifying what data or documents exist, and then placing an order for it. Not super sexy, but that's really just how it rolls. So, when you can't find data and docs online, again, hey, the Giphy is working. Sadly, not everything is on the internet. In fact, I think most estimates that only 10% of all data and documents get posted online, and then the other 90% is just stored offline by government agencies, and it's really hard to figure out what do they even keep. So again, one big thing that IRE tries to reinforce in its training is developing a document state of mind. So it's the whole idea that if you're working on a story, or one a public record, there's got to be some kind of public record that can help you. It's just kind of up to us to figure out what that public record is, and be able to identify and then make an open records request.
Have any of you had a problem like this before, where something you were looking for, you thought should be on the internet, a public record wasn't there? Any case studies you want to offer? Okay.
I will say that I don't know, my experience in the city of Columbia is that I have trouble accessing previous record requests, so I've always kind of had to start from scratch, even though I know that somebody else has already asked. So it's been troublesome to get that.
I'm sorry, David, could you repeat that?
Yeah, so I have trouble in the past, trying to see what other people have requested for this.
Oh, the other sunshine request.
Yeah. And accessing that information that should have been already available because somebody asked for it already, instead of having to start from scratch.
And are they supposed to be posting that on their portal then?
So
or?
they said there's a section in the portal that is they give you the option to file a request or to access the archive. The archive is different.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
so you can find it, but it just doesn't show you anything?
Well, so for instance, the last time I used it, it was showing me 2 records, very random ones that was a long time ago, that it was now a list of just 2 of them.
I see. So it's clearly an incomplete record of sunshine requests. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So yes. This comment was about City of Columbia's portal not having a lot in terms of archived sunshine requests. And you can actually make if you want to get around that, you can actually make a sunshine request of the city, City of Columbia. You would probably have to do it with each individual department, because in Columbia, each city department has its own records custodian. So if you would want to find something from from the finance department, it's going to be a different open records request to the department.
So that's why, I would just say, they don't make it easy a lot of times to get this stuff. So this is where, for all of you, I think data goes hand in hand with people reporting. It's oftentimes by talking to a member of the government or a whistleblower or someone who with inside knowledge who can point you to that right document and say, this is what you should be asking for. Because in talking and interviewing sources, that is where you're going to get the information that enables you to make the kind of very specific targeted request that will require a response. If your request is not specific and targeted, the agencies can often just shove it aside and say it's overbroad. That's a word you'll hear quite a bit.
And then when we're looking at open records, we always want to assume that it's public and that it should be free. We should not have to pay any money for it. And I won't get into more detail about the open records laws because Kathy did a great job talking about the different laws. But I will zoom up a little bit and just talk about, in general, what do all these open record laws do? And it doesn't matter whether it's the Federal Freedom of Information Act or if it's the Missouri Sunshine Law or open records law in Illinois or California or whatever state you're interested in. So they basically kind of give us some basic rights, and we should just assume that our rights are to inspect records. So that means you could if there's nothing posted on the City of Columbia's website, maybe there's a police report that you're interested in. You should be able to go down to the City of Columbia Police Department and ask to inspect the record, because that's basically one of the rights under the open records laws. And we can inspect. Then we can also make copies. So sometimes you could take your smartphone out and maybe take a picture. They don't like that sometimes, so you can always make a photocopy, and open records law will all have guidelines about how much photocopy should cost. And then we also have rights under these laws to get computerized records specifically. And the open records laws set some common themes, such as response time limits, acceptable responses. So response time is just how long do we expect the government agency to get back to us? Under the law, what do they need to do? Can we request a specific data format? It's hey, I would like to get this in an Excel file, that kind of thing. And then also they address costs and things like fee waivers. And I'm just going to do a little quick comparison of FOIA and the Missouri Sunshine Law. And in my computer-assisted reporting class, it's kind of like entry-level data journalism class. I always really steer my students away from working with federal FOIA requests, just because under FOIA, the federal government has 20 working days from when you send your request in to acknowledge your request. It's that's awesome. Thank you, federal government. Thank you, U.S. Department of Commerce, for getting back to us within those 20 days. And they do under the law, they do not need to provide anything. But we can also ask for what's called an expedited review, because we're journalists and we're working on stories that are time sensitive. So, you can definitely ask to get on that expedited track. The Missouri Sunshine Law is better in some ways. State and local government agencies are supposed to get back to you within 3 working days. And the options are they can grant your request, deny it, or ask for extra time. And so the extra time, definitely can be a loophole, but in general, under the Sunshine Law, they're not supposed to say, oh my gosh, do you realize how long that's going to take to fulfill this request? That's going to take so long. It's no, I personally don't know how long it's going to take, but under the Sunshine Law, you're supposed to give me a specific date and tell me when you can produce the records and why you cannot produce the records. Yeah.
I thought it was 3 to 5 days. Did that change, or was that just?
I think it's 3 days. Yeah, and yeah. So the question was, is it 3 to 5 days? But typically under under the Sunshine Law, I basically kind of like round up to a week and say, if I file an open records request like today, and I don't hear back from them, I'll get back to the agency and start nagging them. I'll touch on that, pretty soon. Yeah, the Sunshine Law is not really great at like enforcing non-compliance. So, but yeah, so there are those, and we can talk later too if you have like a specific case. So it's 3 working days: grant, deny, or ask for extra time. And if they deny it, they're supposed to like put the reason why they're denying it in writing. They just can't say, "Oh, that's private information. We don't have to give that to you." It's like, okay, can you the Sunshine Law and FOIA require you to like put in writing what the exemption is? And we'll get to some exemptions really quickly. And then with the Missouri, with FOIA is good because it's more flexible in terms of the data formats. Agencies are supposed to provide this in the format we request if they're able to do that. So if I file a request for an Excel file, if they can physically do that, they're supposed to go and do that. And then under the Sunshine Law, this is where the Sunshine Law is, to me, is kind of really needs to be beefed up. The Sunshine Law is the original format only. They can say, "Oh, we store that data in an Oracle proprietary database. We don't have Excel files with that information in it. We're denying your request because we don't have any records that are responsive to your request." Bye. But the Sunshine Law also encourages them to provide it in the format that you want to use. So you need to like stay on top of those requests and point them to the section of the Sunshine Law that encourages them to go in and provide it, and say, "Oh, but read on to this part of the Sunshine Law. You're supposed to go and work with members of the public and try to provide data in the format requested."
Yeah, because what you don't want is you don't want to get your records back in 50,000 pages of PDFs that are not machine readable that then you would have to hand key into a database. That's what David's talking about. There's also a way to obfuscate by giving you the wrong format. So that's a real problem.
And then in terms of the cost under FOIA, it's just the copying and review costs. How much should it cost to like copy a data file? Like nothing. It's like if you were like copying an Excel file or a CSV file, that's kind of no big deal. And then under Missouri Sunshine, it's cost of copying, staff time, and programming for format conversion. So if you make a request and you convince them to like give you an Excel file, even though they store it in a different format, they can then pass along their programming costs for that. And under Sunshine and FOIA, they're supposed to give you also like a detailed written estimate of why something is cost a certain amount. They just can't say, "Oh, do you know how expensive that would be?" It's like, I have no idea. I don't know like how much it would be to produce this.
Well, and really you should push that. And I mean, I'll give you a really good example. I was working for an organization, and we had a whole team of people going to television stations across the country. This is before the political ad files were made available online. And they were asking for files of television, who had bought political ads at various TV stations. And one guy called me from somewhere in the Shenandoah Valley, near one of the TV stations in Roanoke, and they were going to charge him some exorbitant amount of money to get copies of these files. And so I said, "Okay, just a minute." And I called the station manager, and there wasn't anyone there. I just left a voicemail saying who I was, and I said, "There must be a terrible mistake because in the law it says you have to charge the prevailing rate, and I just called the Staples 6 blocks from you and it cost 10 cents a copy." And within 20 minutes, the guy called me back and said, oh, they're giving me the copies, and it was 10 cents a page. So there are often, I mean, David alluded to that, there are often actual specifics in the law that you can cite. And sometimes when you're talking to someone who's working for a small municipal government or for a private entity that is holding government records like the TV station, you have to kind of pull that out of your pocket and remind them, this is what the law says.
And then, in terms of like the Sunshine Law, like Kathy mentioned, when it was passed, it was amazing. You could print it on a little like business card and like keep it in your pocket. But in fact, there are like so many exemptions that have since been built into FOIA, and then also the Missouri Sunshine Law that keeps certain records locked down. Things like classified for national security. One of my favorite is geological information about oil wells. And when you think about this, it's like, oh, the president who signed this into law, Lyndon Johnson, he was from Texas, and he was like, he was known for kind of like his like industry ties to oil and gas. So they also like got exempted from having to have public records disclosed about them. So it was kind of like good to be friends with the president, right? And then also, here's one that I don't talk about a ton, but it is in the news today: supervision of financial institutions. So if you want, there are different federal agencies that regulate banks, and then if you would ask them for records about these failed or failing banks, you're probably not going to get that because it would fall under that exemption. I will tell you, as a reporter, open records laws aren't kind of like your only source. You should also like push sources for information too. When I was a reporter in Allentown, Pennsylvania, we were doing a story about this community bank that had failed or was in the process of being kind of like failing, and the banking regulators were in there. And one day, somebody just like sent us anonymously a document with information about that particular bank. So they must have like known that somebody knew that had heard that we were working on the story, and then leaked the documents about the bank being taken over by federal regulators. And of course, what we did, when we interviewed the bank president and other people from the bank, we shared that document with them and said, looks like you're under like federal supervision. Can you verify that that's true? And he was like, yeah. It's like, so sometimes it's really helpful like to try to get these documents. There are also federal privacy laws that are really great in protecting yours and my personal privacy. Things like HIPAA, which is for health privacy, FERPA, which is for like student educational records, and DIPA, which is driver record privacy. And a lot of these can have unintended consequences because one of my students wanted to get from the Missouri Department of Revenue a database of all the boats that were registered in Missouri. Missouri's a big boating state. We have the Lake of the Ozarks, and then so the State Department of Revenue said we can't release that information because it's covered under federal privacy law. So to me, it's like they're asking for boating records, but yeah, they were technically correct. But again, if you want to like find boating records in Boone County, you could just go to the county assessor for that. And then in terms of appealing denials, FOIA does have a formal interagency appeals process. So if you file a federal FOIA request, get shot down, there is a kind of a procedure and a timeline to go file a request. You don't even need to be kind of a lawyer to do this, but it's again, just do a little research and say, hey, I'm appealing this decision. And then if you get denied under FOIA, then you need to sue the federal government. There's actually this website that's Syracuse University.
Yeah.
It's called FOIA. Like FOIA complaints online or something like that. They do web scraping of all the cases that people have brought against different federal agencies.
Yeah, and there are other sites, and we provided some links between the two slideshows for you that will, there are organizations that will help you. First of all, there are organizations where you can go, particularly if you're at that appeal level that David's talking about. There are sites like Muckrock and that will help you, Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, which have forms that you can fill in and will kind of walk you through how to file an appeal. And that would be your go-to there. If you end up having to sue and you do not work for an organization that is big enough to have its own lawyers, then there are other organizations such as the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, or WashU's Law School has a First Amendment law clinic, and they will pro bono. They won't take every case, but if they think your case is important, they will often help you, so that you can oftentimes get free legal help for cases like these.
And to answer EJ's question, under Sunshine, you can certainly go to the Missouri Attorney General's website, Sunshine Law section, click File a Sunshine Complaint, but they will only take complaints that are against local government entities, because under their way of thinking, the state attorney general is the lawyer for state level agencies, and they would have a conflict of interest, kind of suing the Missouri Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, this was one of the clips I hyperlinked for you in my slideshow. It's about that, which is controversial. It's a controversial interpretation of the law.
So yeah, and so under the Sunshine, only legal option is suing. And there's also kind of like a weird Missouri Open Records law from 1961 that I'm not. It's called the Open Records Act. I'm not as familiar with it. I think that one story that you provided gets into it. But if somebody's found to have violated that 1961 law, they can be subject to removal or impeachment, guilty of a misdemeanor, traffic ticket, fine or possible jail. But we don't know. I don't think anybody's ever been
I think
prosecuted.
Rudy Keller told me he cited that a few times when trying to get records.
All right, so I'm going to go through in the next few minutes pretty quickly some resources, and again, these are all in the slideshow that we're going to share. The State Attorney General's website has a Sunshine Law webpage where they have this awesome copy and paste language. They can go and just put that into your email or written request, and it's really good. It does not cover things like data formats like CSV files or Excel files, but you can certainly add that. If anybody asks me what's the deal with Illinois' Open Records Act? It's I don't know. It's there's a lot about the Missouri law that I have to stay on top of. But I usually send people to the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press Open Government Guide, because it has really, really detailed breakdowns for all the different states. Also, National Freedom of Information Coalition, which Kathy mentioned, and NFOIC represents state-level open government groups. Student Press Law Center is can be an ally if you're working on stories when you're trying to request information from campus officials and you get denied because of supposed FERPA issues. And then in terms of making a request, you should ask for, I would say, 5 to 10 years worth of data. Because if you're working on something for a story, you would have enough information to compare. And And then this just reinforces like some of the key points and like what's important to put in your open records request.
And you can find these forms on a number of the websites that we've pointed you to. There's lots of help out there on how to craft a FOIA or a Sunshine request. Sunshine, when we talk about Sunshine, it's the state laws. When we talk about FOIA, it's the federal open records laws.
And these open records laws do not give us the right to know what's going on inside the government. What these open records laws do is they give us the ability to either inspect or make copies of documents and data that happen to exist already. So if you keep that kind of like data and documents mindset, I think you'd be more successful and just kind of like identify like what it is you're looking for. And then say, okay, I'm going to get a database about like neighborhood like housing inspections in Columbia. So you could like and like asking a particular question about that would not be helpful in your open records request, but just saying I want a database of this and specifying that in your report, in your letter. So I'm going to go through. And so again, it's especially when you're a student here and you're doing this for class or reporting projects. You know, it can be tough using the open records laws because things take so much time. So just get started on your request early and try to avoid FOIA if you can. So we have about 5 minutes to go, and so happy to take any questions you might have.
Yeah, and I'm just going to follow up on one thing David said. Do not be discouraged by the amount of time it's going to take, because you are at the beginning of your professional career. And there was one student who was working for the Columbia Missourian, came to me, needed some funding and some help to file a Freedom of Information Act request, filed it, didn't get the response until after she graduated, but she's working as a journalist and wrote to me a number of years later saying, I'm still using that data that I got. So your reporting career is just at the beginning, and the things that you're looking for now, you could still be looking at and writing stories about a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. So don't let the fact that somebody says it's going to take a year stop you. Just be dogged and be determined. That's a really important quality for all of us to have.
And if you have any particular questions that you want to talk to us like offline about, I'm certainly like happy to talk. If it's for a story that you're working on, don't feel shy about talking about it in public.
Yeah, and just keep in mind that all of the things, as I said earlier, that we take for granted, that we're going to be able to walk into a public meeting and sit there and cover it, that we are going to be able to ask for public records or look on a website and see what the government is doing, that only happened because of sunshine laws. Up until the 1950s, most government meetings were closed, were behind closed doors. So, and that was the norm. So I think understanding how much things have changed, but also understanding that those changes are always under pressure. In the presentation I gave you, you saw there was a big movement in the early 20th century. Then again in the 1960s and 1970s. So things, openness crests and then it ebbs, and then it takes something and all of us to push for it. And I will tell you that in budgets, one of the first things people cut are the people who are the Freedom of Information Act request officers, the people who are out there trying to get this information to us, which is why they push back when you call and say, I need these records. There's nobody there to collect them. So I think it behooves us as journalists to call the public's attention to the fact that that aspect of government, openness in government, is often starved when it comes to money. And that's part of our job too. Questions, comments? Okay, we're almost at the hour. If any of you have anything you want to talk to us about separately, you can come down and talk to us now, or you know how to reach us. You can email us. So happy hunting.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming out. And
Thanks.
We'll have another IRE-Mizzou Watchdog event next month. We're still firming up the topic, so we'll let you know as soon as that's
And if you
set in
haven't
stone.
joined IRE yet, it's dirt cheap for students and a total bargain, so do it.
Thanks.